So the women had to be strong and do a lot.
Everything in those days. I mean, they didn't know which drawer their socks were in, did they?
No.
Let's be honest about it.
We nearly shook at their teaspoon.
Yes, we did. That's right.
When husbands and sons arrived back from work, the women were expected to have hot food on the table and hot water to wash in. This was further complicated if the men in the house worked different shifts.
If you had a family, perhaps a husband and 2 sons, and they were working in different shifts, you had men going out, men coming in, they all had to be fed at different times, you all had to get their sleep at different times, they all had to get bathed at different times when there wasn't pit baths, so there was water had to be heated.
And of course, in the early days, they didn't have what they called the pit baths, which is where they got bathed. And they had to come home dirty, and you had all this dirty clothes that they'd been wearing. You had to clean all that lot and ready for them for the next day, which wasn't very easy, as you can imagine.
My first 2 children didn't know they had a father.
Oh, well, no.
He was in what we call 4 shift, and he used to go out at 12 o'clock at night. And of course, by the time he came in, the kids were away to school.
In spite of these long and exhausting shifts, some miners still found time to write.
Miners returning home in the dark hours often heard the click-clack-click of a typewriter coming from a house in Whitwell in the Midlands. It was Clary Stafford, and he was typing a play that he'd written about mining folk. It was accepted by the Chesterfield Civic Theatre.
Some men will make a fuss all out.
Maybe so, but I bet you never had your carbuncle poked with a stick.
It was called Dear Strikers, and was about the day the ladies went on strike.
Well, this is a comedy. But ever since I saw a man hacking away at the coalface, I wanted to write about the miners. That was in 1929, when I was 14. And, you know, a miner's life lends itself to humour, drama, and sometimes tragedy. And so, 12 months ago, I decided to write this play about the only people I really knew.
It's a moment of tension, even for the old stagers, as Curtain Up approaches. But Chesterfield soon made up its mind. They liked the show, and they made their appreciation felt.
One miner whose writings came to national prominence during this period was Sid Chaplin from the northeast. His stories often focused on the rural nature of the pit village.
From boyhood, I've loved the long, winding valley with the Pennines, hazy and half-seen in the distance. It was then that the countryside grew upon me. The microcosmos of the village, the fields and farm, the river and the woods provided new wonders every day. When the sun shone, there was open country to run wild in.
This is Sid Chaplin. He wrote these incredibly beautiful stories about working as a young man in the mines, but also about the world of the pit village, kind of what it meant in this period of huge change. And even here he's talking about how the big, modernised, streamlined industry was taking over this small industry that had the idea of the pit village, they were very often very small communities, and what people don't perhaps understand is that they were very often close to the countryside.
I was born in between Weardale and Teesdale and the pits. And there was this splendid moorland landscape just on the doorstep. Just at the end of the street, always you had the pulley wheels. And I graduated from that kind of landscape, 600 feet underground, into an entirely different landscape, a man-made landscape. And that fired me as well.
And I think that this is very much Sid when he writes, my working background is more important, the place and the people where I grew up. And I think that's what he manages to do rather brilliantly, is to use his own life to tell this bigger story.
What's important is this. You have a nice high tea, hind soup, half a pound of cooked pork with a little of the crackling for body. You languorously climb the stairs and have a nice hot bath, water up to your chin. For this is Friday night, and you want to sweat clean, if you have to sweat. And a pin to a penny you will before the weekend's over. Then you shave yourself with real precision. Brush your teeth, cupping a hand over your mouth and blowing your breath up just to make sure that the old womanizing breathing is sweet. Then you pull on a clean white shirt and feel your skin tingle, pingle, tingle. That's the way it should be, and has been, for 1,000 nights and more.
The 1950s had been a good decade for the mining industry, with coal production peaking. But the 1960s would see a prolonged period of contraction. In 1963, Mining Review produced a short piece about the closure of a pit in Wales. It began with a song by Ewan MacColl.
Come all you gallant colliers and listen to me tale, how they closed the Aberraman pit in Aberdare, South Wales. It was in 1842 that coal there first was won. She's yielded 40 million tons, but now her days are done.
Coal was starting to be seen as a dirty fuel and an industry that belonged in the past.
Many people associate the 80s with the real period of decline of the mining industry, which it certainly was. It wasn't the first time that mass closure of pits had happened. The 60s was a period when many thousands of miners lost their jobs and communities were either destroyed or uprooted.
The National Coal Board had to adopt a different approach to attracting new recruits. Teenagers were no longer so keen to go down the pit. So its recruitment films, now made in colour, like this one from 1965, Big Job, had to work much harder to make the industry seem appealing.
And to get the most out of the machines, we need more men. Young men who want to learn the 1,000 skills a miner must master.
Behind the bravado of Big Job, it's clear that this is an industry in decline and that true confidence is beginning to diminish. This is seen in the tone and style of films made from the late 1960s onwards. Health and safety animations, like this one, still had a practical purpose. The tone, though, is plainly more trivial. The problems threatening coal mining were about to become fatally divisive, but the films just weren't able to reflect this.
And then at one point they got really cheeky and asked for a budget for some dolly birds and made us sort of carry on down the pit kind of thing, or Confessions of a Pitman kind of thing, getting a little bit saucy.
One of the interesting things about these films is that the trajectory of the NCB's filmmaking history kind of reflects the trajectory of the coal industry in general. And as we know, of course, in the late 1970s and into the early 1980s, this was an industry headed towards a crisis. And the films take on a kind of slightly desperate triumphalist tone in an attempt to try to convince the viewer that the mining industry has hundreds of years of a glorious future ahead of it.
And it is upon them, they who implement the tools and the decisions, as well as upon the mining engineers, who will continue to devise and to execute their dreams of the future, that we shall all continue to win our essential energy from under the earth, not only for the next 40 years, but for the next 400.
I mean, I think it's very telling that in a film, made in 1978, they make a point of ending on the conclusion, the resounding conclusion, that there are 400 years worth of coal underground. And that was true, and to make that point at that time is quite significant. And perhaps they knew that there were forces at play that meant they were under threat and they might not be around for that long.
The NCB Film Unit, which had been launched in 1947 with pride and much fanfare, making films that were seen by millions in Britain every month, now quietly stopped production as the coal industry began to be broken up.
The very final mining review 36th year, number 5, which was released in April 1983, so just a year before the miners' strike began. To me, this is one of the most moving films ever made.
Only coal, exemplified by the impending birth of the new Selby coalfield and its vast reserves, can guarantee us a supply of energy for centuries ahead. Selby is a forerunner, a blueprint for the other great coalfields of the future. There must and will be a light at the end of the energy tunnel, and, born of coal, it will dazzle us.
The very year the film unit closed, the National Union of Miners went on strike for the last time. The strike ended in defeat for the miners and led to an extensive closure programme and the eventual privatisation of the industry in 1991. There are now less than a handful of deep coal mines in Britain, employing just a few thousand people. In most of the former mining communities, the remnants of the coal industry have been erased from the landscape.
If you look around Ashington now, or if you were a stranger coming into Ashington for the first time, there's very little evidence that it was ever a thriving coal-producing town. It was inevitable, I suppose, but nevertheless, it changed the whole nature of the town, it changed the people, it changed their attitudes.
I mean, my granddaughter, she's 16 now. When she was about 10, I took her to where I was working, and it was a boiler house full of coal. When she saw the coal, she said, "What's all them stones?" She thought it was stones. She was about 8 to 10 years of age. She's 16 now, so she didn't even know what coal was. So there we go. That's how far distance we are from it now.
It stands so proud, the wheel so still.
Here on BBC4 Tomorrow, we visit the school taking a brand new approach to autism, challenging behaviour from 9. And stay with us tonight for a major shake-up as Jem Stansfield explores some substantial explosions next.
There is no sound. Now there are no men underground.